Over the nearly 20-year history of the Battlefield franchise, there have been many great maps worthy of praise. Some maps become legendary, icons themselves of the Battlefield series and worth remembering for their balance, uniqueness, and special gameplay. This is the story of the best maps in Battlefield.
Huh, that's odd. I thought that would be big news.
You thought what would be big news?
Well, there seems to be an absence of a certain ornithological piece. A headline regarding mass awareness of a certain avian variety.
What are you talking about?
Oh, have you not heard? It was my understanding that everyone had heard.
Heard what?
Brian, don't!
Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. But bird's a word, well, a bird, bird, bird. But bird's a word, well, a bird, bird, bird. But bird's a word, well, a bird, bird, bird. But bird's a word, well, don't you know? The bird, well, everybody's talking about the bird, well, the bird. The bird, the bird, well, the bird. Well, everybody's heard about the bird.
Let's talk city maps. City maps, or urban maps, are crucial to the success of the Battlefield series. Many of them limit vehicle numbers to allow for map design which highlights infantry mechanics in a close setting and allows for far faster-paced, higher-intensity experiences than found on large layouts. Battlefield 1942 had two which became iconic for infantry play. The first was Stalingrad, and the second was Berlin. We'll talk about you later. Battlefield Vietnam continued the trend of including infantry and close-quarters urban combat, and they did so in a big way. The game had 5 of them, but that wasn't the big deal. The upgrade in scale and quality from these early BF 1942 maps to Vietnam's city maps was huge. Saigon 68 pushed new ground in subterranean combat. Hue 68 and its rough counterpart Hue 72 were the game's yin and yang. And yet there were 2 other city maps which, like Hue, shared the same map with a flipped environment. Rounding out the best maps of Battlefield Vietnam is Quang Tri, both of them. If Hue was about backyard fights and ancient fortifications, Quang Tri is the urban industrial battle where infantry combat is more frequent and intense than any other map in the game. Both maps take place in the city of Quang Tri, using largely the same tile set, with 1968 and 1972 being the variant names. Like the Hue 1972 map, the Quang Tri 1972 version is much more worn down, featuring total destruction of many buildings which were standing in the 68 version, along with a different flag layout. Starting with Quang Tri 1968, you will first notice the sprawling industrial buildings, numerous streets and alleyways, and lack of cover along the streets. Several of these buildings are a copy-pasted factory model enterable all the way up to the 3rd floors, and often with windows overlooking the streets. This makes the map one of the first city maps in the Battlefield series with significant verticality. Despite this, the limited windows of the structures and flag dispersion around the map doesn't mean you are finding campers in every window. In fact, while the true size of the map may not be gigantic, the map feels larger due to all the buildings and streets, and occasionally gets confusing without the use of the minimap. Certain parts of the city are more destroyed than others, and often possess more cover and pathing options than the intact portions of the map. They can be identified by the brown blotches on the map. These include the northwest sectors and the southeast area within the alley. The map itself has 5 flags, with the NVA team beginning the round with only 1, the North City, while the ARVN team begins with 4. This lone NVA flag tells you several things. First, that the North City is the main base of the NVA team. Keeping with the style with many Vietnam maps, there are no uncapturable flags, and as such, it has the longest capture timer of any on the map at 90 seconds. Second, that this map begins with a massive breakout effort in order to secure more points. And third, its location sets the stage for a potential base camp should the NVA team not make a strong opening push, or the ARVN team have better players, coordination, or luck. The North City flag is placed within the damaged factory building in the northeast corner of the map. It provides the NVA team one T-72 tank, one PT-76 tank, and one BTR-60. This is a significant amount of armor necessary for an effective breakout, and they'll need it, because the only two bridges over the nearby river make an effective containment area if they don't. On the round start, players would spawn en masse here, scramble for the armor, and push west toward the office's flag and south towards the alley. The office's flag can be found at the bottom of one of the damaged 3-story structures. It has a very small capture radius, usually is occupied by infantry battles, and can be camped from outside via armor. However, the true opening fight of Quang Tri is always along the eastern road going south to the alley flag. The alley, a small street that one could actually miss if not paying attention, is tightly packed within a small street surrounded by damaged buildings. While it provides nothing to the ARVN team at the start, it will spawn a light PT-76 tank if the NVA captures it. This flag was notorious in the days of the game's prime for being a massive meat grinder. The flag itself sat in the middle of the alley, and many of the 3-floor factories surrounding the flag were enterable, giving a high ground advantage for the defenders. However, it also had a nasty couple of spawn points practically on top of the flag in the middle of the open, clearly in sight down the main road. This resulted in many players being spawn camped or mowed down from both directions. Additionally, at the start of the round, the majority of both teams clashed along this eastern road. Without much cover on it, it was common to see players and tanks shooting down the street and getting kills through the dust clouds. This street battle was one which continued on throughout the match, until one side broke through or the battle around the other flags took precedence. South of the alley, the municipal building flag provided the ARVN team with a Patton tank, which typically came to the eastern road's defense. However, should this small 2-story building be captured, it opened up a flank route to the alley defenders. The last flag on the map, the radio tower, was another popular location as the area possessed a decent cover in the form of small walls and trees in the surrounding vicinity. The flag radius here was one of the largest on the map, and even though it was positioned on the roof, it could be captured from the first 2 floors. Additionally, attacking it was fairly easy despite its corner location, as players could sneak through the bushes along the northern wall or enter through the connecting factory in the south. It also contributed an APC or heavy tank to the controlling team. Quang Tri 1968 may have been an infantry excursion, but given the urban design, vehicle numbers, and clean terrain, it also made it the best map in Battlefield Vietnam for tank play, which was incredibly difficult on nearly every other map. Regardless that the NVA could field more armor at a time, it is difficult to say which team actually had the advantage in this respect, as during a typical round, tanks were quickly destroyed left and right thanks to the kit balance. On the other hand, Quang Tri 1972 is a different experience altogether. 4 years of war and destruction later, this city map lies within nearly the same boundaries as its predecessor, just with a different flag layout and drastically altered environment. Huge sections of the city now lie damaged and destroyed, creating new pathing options for infantry, and tall, clutter-filled roadblocks which make tanking a nightmare. Even so, this version also fields plenty of armor for both teams, particularly the ARVN, who upon capturing most of the flags are like, "You get a Sheridan, and you get a Sheridan, you get a Sheridan." Mind you, the effectiveness of these tanks are far worse here than on the 1968 counterpart. The tanks can traverse the debris slopes, but not knowing what's on the other side frequently meant death. More experienced tankers tended to stay back and hug the flags on which the tanks spawned, using them for as much cover as they could. Once again, 5 flags populate the map, with 2 of them in the exact same locations as before: the municipal building and the radio tower, which has been transformed by the destruction. A third flag, the offices, lies in a similar building just across the street from where it existed in the 1968 version. This time, being located in an undamaged building with 3 accessible floors. The new offices flag, because of its limited entrances and tiny flag radius, could be a frustrating flag to attack, as enemies frequently camped in the doorways with all sorts of anti-personnel mines and handheld explosives. Even then, once enemies were on the flag, it was not uncommon to see them killed by players on the 3rd floor dropping even more explosives. Because of its location and defensive nature, the office flag was a centerpiece of the round and a location of high-intensity fighting along with the clearing. A new flag, the warehouse, is located near the top left of the map along the northern border. Like the old office flag, it simply sits on the ground floor of a damaged 3-story structure with a small capture radius. A new vehicle spawns on the streets, making it a fairly vulnerable spawn. Quang Tri 1972 is also faction inverted. Whereas the NVA had the single flag start on 1968, this time it's the Arvin team. However, they are not locked in the northeast corner. Instead, a new flag called the Clearing provides their opening position and a vast array of armor. This includes 2 tanks, 1 mobile artillery piece, and 1 M113 troop transport. Being the main base of the Arvin team, it is the only flag on the map with a long 90-second duration capture time. The point is surrounded by piles of rubble and has 2 tents near the flagpole containing ammo and a med locker. Oddly, all of the vehicles spawn pointed north, so perhaps it is intended that they move out towards the warehouse. However, given the other NVA flags, the NVA team will be coming up behind them. The municipal building, located in the same location on both maps, this time is NVA controlled and provides the majority of that team's armor. This armor usually scurries north over the roadblocks and toward the clearing along with a huge batch of infantry. If all of the Arvin armor has moved out already, this can be a tricky defense. Round start oddities notwithstanding, Quang Tri 1972 provides an even greater infantry experience thanks to the increased amount of cover from the rubble, additional pathing options not available previously, and most importantly, a more balanced round experience due to most of the flags not being tucked away in a corner. It was also much more spread out across the total map area, and infantry fights could take place at every corner. Aside from their structural design, another great feature of both maps is the benefit of their dusty atmosphere. As if the smog from the factories or the damaged buildings was polluting the streets, the draw distance is fairly limited. This fog on an urban map with very long streets lacking obstacles provides critically needed cover from snipers, tanks, and the laser beam accuracy of most of the game's weapons, and allows some players to sneak their way through the limited foliage. In this way, both maps feature the same excellent use of concealing draw distance as Strike at Karkand later on in Battlefield 2. If these maps have one flaw, it is simply that the nature of 64-player conquest in a tight urban environment will inevitably cause Zerg movement and horde mentality, resulting in occasional base camps or outright capouts. The position of flags in corner pockets also adds to this risk. It is also inescapable that in public games, teams with more skillful infantry players could drastically overpower the other, but it could be argued that the number of tanks on the maps does act to counteract this. Is one of these maps superior to the other? Possibly. What I will say is that from a purely analytical perspective, the advantage might go toward 1972, as the redesigned flag variant made base contains less frequent and the destroyed structures opened up more pathing options. However, this is something I dare not answer beyond that, since both are so good and have such subtle negatives to them that I feel like each player should decide for themselves purely based on subjective experience. While both of these maps were excellent for either a handful of players or a full 64-man server, it is important to remember that all footage in this video is from within the past 2 years, and definitely is on the low player count side. Because of this, Things like mortar spam down the streets, rocket barrages through the windows, and the anti-personnel mine spam blocking doorways are things that just aren't seen anymore in the way the map used to be played. It seems almost heretical for a Battlefield title to have multiple maps using the same tile set, border, and terrain, making moderate alterations to them, and then proceeding to call them different maps. And even then, still be the same game mode. This is something more Battlefield games should attempt, as it opens the door to flag experimentation and alternative player experiences. Battlefield Vietnam does this 3 freaking times. And yet, in 2 out of those 3 examples, one version of each tends to be great while the other has significant issues. Yet, Quang Tri is the lone exception. Both of its variants provide incredibly balanced, fast-paced gameplay and allow for the utilization of nearly every mechanic in the game, all without going overboard. The flurry of armor which is available on each instance can be cleanly negated with counter positions readily available and plenty of alleyways for flanking rocket barrages. The crazy thing is that few other Battlefield games have so perfectly created a map that was so in sync with its own game design. While the limitations of the game engine and early development of Battlefield mechanics as a whole no doubt contributed to this, the maps nevertheless were a triumph with what resources were available and managed to outclass any urban design seen in Battlefield 1942. Battlefield Vietnam's Quang Tri. Both of them were excellent maps that had perfect lighting, atmosphere, gunplay, and urban combat layouts which were well ahead of their time. In their age, they were the best infantry-dominated maps in the series. And of course, even if you hated it, 1968's loading screen still taught a legion of new young Battlefield players that the bird was in fact the word.
Oh my god, Peter, are you alright?
Papa oh my mau mau, Papa oh mau mau mau, Papa oh my mau mau, Papa oh mau mau mau, Papa oh my mau mau, Papa oh mau mau mau, oh my mau mau, Papa oh mau mau mau, Papa oh my mau mau, Papa oh mau mau mau.